If you dig deep, regardless of whether or not you think you can do it, you can do it. You are not just the receptionist. You're not just the plumber. You're not just the cashier. You're not just. I sat next to a man once and I asked him what his role in this process was that we were talking about. He said, I was just the attorney. And I was like, oh my gosh, this man spent $100,000 going to school and years of his life, and he still relegated himself to that four-letter word.
Put your hand on your heart, look up at the sky, smile and say, hey, I'm alive. Thanks for being alive with me today.
Hello and welcome to Be Alive with Kate Manser. I am thrilled today to have Gina Schaefer on the show for many reasons. We met about a year and a half ago, and I just really appreciated her energy, her expertise, and her humility. Come to find out, all of the amazing things she did made me appreciate her humility even more. Gina is the founder and former CEO of 13 hardware stores in the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area, as well as Virginia. She employs more than 300 people and has actually begun a transfer of ownership through an ESOP to her teammates, which is big. Her big passion lies in developing urban markets, supporting small businesses, and helping women to succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields. She has written a book called Recovery Hardware, how when she first started out, she gave a chance to people in the local area around her first hardware stores who had struggled with addiction, and what she learned in that process and the lives that she transformed and how her life was also transformed. Welcome, Gina Schaefer, to Be Alive. I'm so thrilled to have you today.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
And you're wearing my most favorite color, chartreuse.
Love it. It's
So my
sunny.
first question is just like a really small question. When are you running for president?
Uh, Never, but I've been known to fundraise for some of them.
The reason I ask that is genuinely you are a leader among leaders. You're a head above the rest because you lead with this compassionate heart and also are incredibly successful. You are able to
Thank you.
balance these, and just this golden thread that you've had through all of your success in business, in media, and beyond is reaching out and helping other people. And so I'm curious, who has helped you on your journey back in the day that maybe inspired this for you?
Oh, I had this amazing boss. So I was in the tech industry prior to starting the hardware stores. And so I literally went from software to hardware. And I had this boss whose name was Connie. And I had nicknamed Connie Quabs, Queen of BS,
Queen
because
of
Connie
BS.
could sell, yeah, she was great. Connie could sell anything to anyone. And so what she taught me a little bit was the fake it until you make it, which I think young people just need to know that we can do. And that if you believe in someone, you can figure out a way to make them part of your bigger world. And she wanted me to be part of a project that she was trying to sell. And so there was a little bit of self-serving for her when she first met me to put me on that project. But then also just really good lessons for me. Like she could sell anything to anybody. And that was impactful for me as a young woman.
Isn't it amazing how when we're experientially learning something, how we're cognitively aware that a lesson is happening, or maybe we're not even cognitively aware, but it sounds like you could feel something opening up in you that we now see has changed the course of your life.
Yeah. Hindsight's always 2020, but are a lot of things that I learned from her that had to do with she was a woman, an Asian woman in the technology field in Northern Virginia, which was not very diverse at the time and was all new. I mean, this was the mid 90s. And so it was really one of the first big tech booms. And so companies were scrambling to find employees everywhere. And she just came out of nowhere with this passion to sell and promote people and make money. It was all of these things rolled in one. And yeah, it's fun to look back on those kinds of moments and realize what you learned from it, whether you knew it or not.
What aspects of Connie do you feel like you carry in your present life today?
Well, I think I've been using this phrase, we can do hard things, which is not a new expression at all. But I think that's the part that I've carried the most, that if you dig deep, regardless of whether or not you think you can do it, you can do it. And I've experienced that time and time again in my business, both myself personally and then watching my teammates who have struggled with something overcome it or work through it. And they do the hard things. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I carry from her.
That's beautiful. And I love what you
Yeah.
said about how we have the opportunity to, if we give someone a chance to learn something from everyone. I also come from a software background. I worked at Google for many years.
Mm.
And I remember hearing this anecdote about, I can't remember if it was Larry or Sergey, but one of them shared this anecdote about how they always have at least 30 minutes allotted for every interview. But typically, they can usually tell within the first 10 minutes, as we do, that whether or not the person is a fit for the company or the particular role. But they said that they never end an interview early, that they always sit with that person
Mm.
for 30 minutes because they know and they believe that we have the opportunity to learn something from every single person who we come across. And it sounds like you've learned valuable
Ooh.
lessons from Connie. Who's teaching you lessons today?
So for the last 20 years, I technically retired from my role. I mean, I did retire. I shouldn't use air quotes, but last July. So I am no longer the CEO of my business, which feels weird still to say. For 20 years, I learned from all of my teammates, every single one of them. One of the things that I write about in Recovery Hardware is the fact that I filled my life with non-traditional teachers, people who didn't have teaching degrees, who never spent time, in a lot of cases in college, who did something, said something, exhibited something that taught me how to be a better leader and how to be a better person. So I would say that's still ongoing. I'm obviously still involved in some ways with the company, but I learned from everybody. And I love what you just said because I think not only can we learn from people and sitting with them for 30 minutes can teach us something, it comes from such a place of respect. I've allotted 30 minutes for you. I'm going to give you the 30 minutes.
Mm.
I had this conversation. One of the first people that I hired when I had one location was a kid named Eddie, and he was 14. And I mean, I knew nothing. I didn't know if I could hire a 14-year-old, but he walked into the office, into the hardware store. I mean, we didn't have an office. I actually interviewed him sitting on some steps in the plumbing department. And he came with a mentor. And every time I asked him a question, the mentor would answer. And this was a man from the community who was helping Eddie. And so I would direct the question to Eddie and I would hear the answer come from the guy that was with him. And I mean, I was digging deep. I'm like, I think I want to give him a job because I felt like I should help him. I hired a lot of people, maybe when I shouldn't have. But anyway, we had some core values. And one of the core values was be a good neighbor. And so I finally turned to the mentor and I said, tell me about a time you were a good neighbor. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eddie like jump up and he lit up and he had never had a job before. He didn't have a boss, had never had a boss before. I don't think anyone in Eddie's immediate family had ever had a job, to be honest. But he had a neighbor and he helped that neighbor carry her groceries. He took care of her cat. Like he knew what I meant when I said, tell me about a time you were a good neighbor. And I gave Eddie a job that day based on that answer. I never gave up, even though he originally wasn't doing any of the speaking. And he worked with us for 10 years, 10
Wow.
years until he left. He was 24. And so anyway, I'm babbling, but I love the 30-minute thing because it's respect and you never know what you're going to hear.
Well, and what I want listeners to take out of that, beyond whatever amazing things you just took out of that beautiful anecdote that Gina just shared, is her comment on seeking out non-traditional teachers. I think that's really important. I think we look to certain people, and a lot of times we see like a homogenization among a lot of leaders. But the fact that our fellow humans can teach us different things in different ways, and that we can find the values and the lessons that we're looking for in unlikely places. And you have done an amazing example of that, right? You lift people up. And one of the things I want to focus on in our talk today that I think is on so many people's minds is, how do I find meaning and feel alive when I have to go to work every day and sit behind a computer and go to meetings that are sometimes vacant and frustrating, or I don't feel like I connect with my coworkers. But you do such a good job, I think, of creating meaning. And notice I didn't say finding meaning. I feel like you
Yeah.
go out and you create meaning, and you have a job and you're an entrepreneur. And I'm sure that there's a lot of unsexy things that you have to do in your work. But I would just love to hear some stories and anecdotes that you have and some lessons that you can share with people listening who are saying, I want to be fulfilled. I want to feel alive. But how do I do that when 60% of my life is doing this thing that maybe I'm not doing pediatric brain surgery and maybe I'm not an entrepreneur? So, how do you create that nexus?
Yeah. So I realized probably 18 years in. So it took me a long time for this lesson to
Is
hit me
that
over the
all?
head.
I
Yeah.
love that. It takes
Um,
a while.
yeah. I realized that I was using the word just like a curse word. And so I would say things like, I'm just a retailer, or I just run a retail store, or I just sell hardware. And it finally, I don't know why I realized. I know, I actually do know why. So I was introducing one of my teammates. He's a cashier, and I was introducing him to a visitor. And I love it when I walk into businesses and the owner or manager immediately introduces me to their team, because I think that reflects the culture that they're trying to build if they respect all of the members. So I was introducing one of my cashiers, and I was just going on and on about how great he was. And I was thinking about how I had described myself earlier in a meeting, and I had actually said, I just sell hardware. And I thought, what if I had said, he's just a cashier? That is so insulting, right? You heard it. Like you just should, so you can hear what it sounds like. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I talk about myself like that all the time. And I'm pretty confident. Like this isn't just me like needing an ego boost. And I thought, what if my teammates hear me talking about myself like that and think I talk about them like that? That was really meaningful for me. I never, and you'll hear yourself say just now after having this conversation, I try to make sure that's always eliminated. And so I think, sort of bringing it back to your question, nobody is just anything. You are all, everybody who is at a company plays a part, no matter how small you think that part is. You are not just the receptionist. You're not just the plumber. You're not just the cashier. You're not just, I sat next to a man once and I asked him what his role in this process was that we were talking about. He said, I was just the attorney. And I was like, oh my gosh, this man spent $100,000 going to school and years of his life, and he still relegated himself to that four-letter word. And so I think as employees, you said it, some days our jobs are going to suck. That's just life. Some days our families do, or our dog does, or our whatever. We have to realize that my husband likes to say that not everything's a 10. And when you have a 5, you realize how important the 10 is. So when you have a crappy day, you realize at work, you realize how much better the really good days are. And then layer on top of that the fact that whatever you're doing at that, in your role at that company, contributes to the success of that company. So you're not just anything. I don't know if that answers your question. Kind of went on a
Absolutely.
tangent.
To me, what that does is it levels the playing field, because I think we're human. We like to say, "Oh, in the future I'll do this," or when I have this job, then I'll be able to do this. But what you're saying with this, I mean, first of all, ask ourselves, where are you justing yourself? Where are you
Correct.
relegating yourself to I'm just, oh, I'm just this age, or oh, I'm just this weight, or I'm just
Yes.
in this job, right? So where are we justing ourselves? But I think by saying don't just yourself, you're leveling the playing field by saying creating meaning isn't about what job we're in or what label we have or what amount of power that we have, that it's more about a mindset shift, right?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're saying, that we
Yes.
shouldn't just ourselves, because the opportunity to create meaning and, dare I say, change the world can be done from anywhere?
Yes. Yes. So let's layer on top of that for a second. I run retail stores that are fairly small, and retail is a really, really tough business. But when I started getting outside of our four walls into the community, I could see how that particular four wall structure played a bigger role in the main streets where my stores are. And then when I looked beyond the main street, we'll just use Washington, D.C. as an example, where my first store is, we played a bigger role in the city, which is it's not a huge city, but it's a big city.
It's a big city.
And then we played a bigger role. Like the world just kept expanding. And so then all of a sudden I went from being a retailer in a box to a retailer on a main street in a city in a country. And all of a sudden, what I do is not just anything. We are part of an ecosystem that makes our cities wonderful, our families safe, our communities vibrant. All of these things, if we just stop to think about how our small piece is really part of something much bigger.
Beautiful. So connect some dots for me. Help us understand what are some of your core values and how those have played out that you're able to enact them and wield them and apply them in your career.
For me personally, I'm chuckling to myself because I had a teammate once say that I wasn't allowed to hire people anymore because I was hiring everybody. And the person who gave me that rule was somebody who I had hired when he was on house arrest for selling drugs. He was is amazing, worked with us for 11 years. But one day he said, "You really need to evaluate how you're hiring people." And it was awesome because I was like, "Wait a minute. I gave you a job." He's like, "Yeah, but I'm good for this job." I think I see, and my husband's the same way, which is, I think, part of what makes us successful. He's my business partner. We're very, very trusting. And people who aren't trusting will say, well, that's when you get burned. We are going to get burned in life no matter what we do. Why would we live our life only worrying about being burned? And so I think I'm very grateful that I trust people. The second piece is you can see the good in everybody. And here's a bigger world example. So years ago, the Harvard Business Review they wrote an article about corporate boards not having enough women on them, which is still the case today. It's still, way less than 50%. They said, think about the skill sets you're looking for and look for them where you're not looking. So corporate boards will say, well, we only want people who've been in the C-suite. Well, historically, women and people of color have not been in the C-suite. So how the hell do they find us if we were never allowed to be there in the first place, or if we haven't gotten there yet? So they said things like, look in academia. Can you find professors who are teaching about these subjects that you're interested in? Can you find administrators of library systems or universities that don't have a C in their title, but have all of the experience that you're looking for from an intellectual standpoint? So I think seeing the good in people, but thinking about others' skill sets differently is really important. I mean, going back to Skippy, who was the drug dealer, he was very good with money. And people chuckle when I say that, but he was good at buying new inventory because he couldn't sell stuff if he didn't have stuff. And so he was good. He was very good with dealing with difficult customers. I needed people who understood how to deal with difficult personalities or mad customers. People don't always come to the hardware store when they're in a good mood because their ceiling's leaking or their plumbing, there's trauma. So he was very good at teaching. He taught us a lot about how to deal with difficult customers. And so had I just on the surface looked at what he did before and said, that's one, it was illegal, which he fully acknowledges, I would have never taken the skills that he built doing something illegal and translated it for him and for my business into something that was completely respectable.
Mm, beautiful. So I really can tell that you have a the values and the spirit of, as you said, trust, also openness and curiosity, right? I feel like you have this mentality that's like, I trust you until you prove me wrong. Like you've built a business. Obviously, you know how to protect yourself. You know how to put boundaries in place. You're a savvy businesswoman, business person, but you have this sense of, I'm going to hold space for you until you prove me otherwise. And not that you're waiting for them to do wrong, but that you truly let them come as themselves. And to do that takes trust in ourselves, because I think a lot of us who are scared of the other political party,
Yeah.
the homeless person, the drug addicted person, the masked man that's going to come out of the bushes at any moment, or whomever, there's a certain amount, it's not wrong to be scared of those, I'll qualify, but
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of, I think, distrust of ourselves and the world around us. So I imagine, and it sounds like you have a strong sense of self. Who built that in you, and how do you feel about, your confidence over the years?
I don't know. Are we not born this way? Well, there was a lot of trial and error for sure. I mean, I don't really know how to answer that because I think a little bit of it is I was born being trusting. My parents were very trusting, and they instilled in me a lot of values and a lot of appreciation. I grew up in a very small, all white Midwestern Catholic town. There was no other. But somehow my parents made me understand that the world was bigger than that little town we were living in. And I needed to figure out, they wanted me to make sure I figured out how to play in a bigger world where everybody wasn't going to look like me or sound like me or believe the same things that I believe in. And so I think that was a really good educational foundation. And then I grew a love of languages and travel. And you can't love those things without realizing that your language and your home is the only place in the world to be. And then again, going back to, well, all of a sudden I'm in this little box on this little strip on retail. Everybody coming in to shop in my store was different because it was a city. And so they spoke different languages and they looked different. And my teammates had very different backgrounds. My very first teammate had been in prison for 17 years. And I didn't know that because I didn't think it was any of my business to ask. And I keep talking about these people that worked with us for 10 years, but Tommy worked with us for 10 years. And had I asked him, I might have never hired him, or
Wow.
somebody else might have never hired him, right? I probably would have. But my second teammate came from an addiction services clinic down the street and immediately said to me, I've been clean from a crystal meth addiction for 6 weeks, which I know now is like a terribly early time. He was very fragile, but he was honest with me. And I could have just said, take a hike. Sorry, I don't care, or not my problem, or I don't need you. But 22 years later, he's still clean and we're still friends. Like those kinds of beautiful things don't happen unless you trust or believe. And at the same time, my husband likes to say that you can't judge everyone by the best or worst thing they ever did. We've had plenty of people work for us who have done things that were inappropriate, who went to college, who had educated parents, who never used a drug in their life. Like anybody can do something wrong. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh my goodness. I think back to what you said a few minutes ago about how you like to introduce your employees, right? Like someone comes in and you're like, okay, hi, I'm Gina. Oh, I'm the owner, but let me introduce you to Tommy, the cashier. Let me tell you about how great he is and how he's been with us for 10 years. And that's a
Yep.
really tactical way that we can uplift the world around us. And a lot of us, I think pretty much all of us, we want to leave the world better than we found it. Or at minimum, from our ego perspective, we want to be remembered for doing something good, right?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
sort of two sides of the same coin. And a lot of us think, "Oh, I need to open a business with 17 locations," or, "Oh, I need to write a book that becomes a New York Times bestseller. Oh, I need to open schools in Africa," right? But what the example that you just gave is, I think, just I'll say small, but it is not small. It's actually a profound way that as we're in this conversation about how to create meaning in our everyday life and even when we're at work, uplifting the people around us by giving them the mic, giving them the
Yeah.
spotlight is a
Yes.
huge way to make the world a better place and to create these ripples of goodness because now Tommy has learned from you and Tommy will pass that on. And those ripples go far beyond that which we will ever
Absolutely.
comprehend. So I'm curious if you have off the cuff any other small, quote unquote, but profound ways that you have found to uplift the world around you in your everyday life and even at work.
I mean, you touched on it. I think just talking about people all the time, telling someone else's story, even if you weave it into your own, but who are they? How are they? What are they doing? How can you help them? There's a quote in the beginning of my book that I love. I always wondered when somebody would do something about that. I didn't say this, by the way. This is someone else's quote. I always wondered when somebody would do something about that. And then I realized I was somebody. And I thought, wow, if we all believed that no matter what we do, we can be the somebody and then create the next somebody, that's huge. I mean, that's really powerful. And so I think just really just sharing other stories. I spoke with a young woman yesterday who's starting a business in Atlanta, and she heard me speaking almost 2 years ago, we figured out. And I mean, honestly, I didn't remember her, but she had asked me a question as an audience member and she kept my card and she wanted advice. And she called me and she said, will you talk to me about this? And I was like, hell yeah. But I didn't know I had made an impact on this young woman that she would remember 2 years later and still be able to reach out. And oh, by the way, when I talked to her yesterday for 45 minutes, I learned two or three things for my own business that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't talked to her. So I don't know if that answered your question at all.
It does, and it again harks back to this quality of openness that you have, that a lot of people might say, "Oh, I'm a big shot entrepreneur. I don't have time to meet with this person." But the entrepreneurs that I look up to are the ones who take time to connect with people who are at a different point on the path. And again, it comes back to that level of openness that you have and that curiosity. So you're
Yeah,
at an interesting point in your career now, right? You are
I am.
transitioning your business, you're moving into, we said air quotes, no more retirement. And for a lot of people, I've noticed, I've coached a lot of people through that time period. That comes with a lot of challenge because and it really comes down to self-worth. And
Yeah.
I battled a lot of self-worth issues in 2022. And this is, I think, a theme that comes up often throughout our life is, figuring out where our self-worth comes from and rejiggering it and reorienting it to be more aligned with truly who we are and our intrinsic value. And like I said, a lot of people struggle with that in retirement because as someone who has built this amazing business and spoken on stages and written books, there can come a certain amount of self-worth that comes with achievement, that comes with being looked at as this successful entrepreneur. And while, of course, you carry that success with you and the amazing lives that you've touched as you continue on through retirement and whatever amazing ventures you take on, it can be challenging because we have to rejigger our self-worth and figure out, oh my gosh, I'm not that anymore. What do I do with my time? What do
Yeah.
people respect me for? I feel like I'm doing nothing. So, how are you feeling in this transition point in your life?
Well, you definitely, I believe, lose some sense of identity because our identities, particularly for the founder of a company, your identity often is rolled up into the, the identity of the business. And how do I now talk about myself with without saying I own hardware stores? What am I if I'm not a hardware store owner? And so the rejiggering for me is making that part of my origin story, but then where am I going from here? And I think going from here, hopefully, we'll be talking to other people about the topics that you and I have touched on, the openness and the trust and the development of others, and just remembering where I came from. And yeah, it's a big part of my identity, but then how do I carry what I learned there without carrying there forward?
So, if you were
Um,
to give a piece of advice to someone who is at an earlier or midpoint of their career, whether they're an entrepreneur or not, who I mean, I worked at Google for 5 years, and one of the reasons I had to quit was because I realized that I had put so much self-worth in working for this prestigious company, and I couldn't wait for when someone at the party would be like, "Oh, so what do you do?" So that I could make this joke about how I work for this small company you've probably never heard of, but it was because I thought I was so cool because I worked at Google, but there came a point where I realized how hollow that was. So, what advice would you give to someone who maybe is sort of aware that their self worth is coming from their job and maybe a certain title that they have or how much money that they make? How can they pivot sooner rather than later to reorient to something more meaningful and more meaty and more heart centered?
well, I would say so. Let's just use a big company like that as an example. If they want to stay at a company like that, and those companies have so many great resources, figure out how to reorient yourself within the company that aligns with something that speaks to you. Assuming you want to leave like where what your role is, because some people are happy with where they are, right? And they might want to stay. So I would say first look internally. Is there a way to realign your values with the company that you work for, particularly if you're scared of going somewhere else or you don't want to open your own business. So, what other opportunities do you have where you are? And then outside of that, so many people that I've talked to don't really get involved. Again, it goes back to the four walls concept. They don't really get involved with groups outside of their company. So, who are you talking to? Are you working with a coach? Are you going to conventions or trade shows or industry meetings where you're meeting other people? So, at least you're continuing to build a network for when or if you decide you want to do something differently, like the young woman I mentioned, you know who to call. And so nothing has to happen overnight. But I think we can, it's like the breadcrumbs, right? Hansel and Gretel. Like you can pick up things along the way everywhere you go. and leave a path for you to follow when you're ready to follow it.
Yeah, and I think that you touch on another element of how to create meaning in our work here, which is you said so beautifully about lifting up other people, but you're also talking here about the importance of reaching out to other people. And that if
Yes.
you're feeling bored in your job or you're feeling unfulfilled by your job, connect with people either in your company, look beyond your group, and then even in your industry or beyond, because yeah, that I love that Max Lucado quote, which is when you are on your deathbed, are you going to hug your degree in the walnut frame? Are you going to ask to be carried out to your car so that you can stroke the leather? No, of
Yeah.
course not, because what matters is relationships. And if relationships matter then, why shouldn't relationships matter now? And it sounds like
Now.
you really do prioritize connecting with people.
I had the father of a friend of mine when I was in my first tech job. He owned a travel agency, and everyone in the office at the tech company would laugh because we all knew him. His name's Victor, and Victor had an old fashioned Rolodex, and every month or so he'd call one of us, and it was just to check in. He knew most of us couldn't afford his trips yet, but he someday we might be able to. And I think I was always really good at connecting, but that was a more formal networking way that he was silently teaching me how to do. And then let's fast forward to 20, maybe it was 2008. I sent a handwritten card. So that's been my Victor for my life. I like to make and send handwritten cards. I sent a handwritten card to a local hardware store owner that I respected, but had never met. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be you. And 12 years later, 12 years, 11 years later, he called and asked me to buy his business. And he said, I never got rid of that card. I still
Wow.
had never met him. Like somehow we had not connected in town. We hadn't connected in industry events. And he is 22 years older than me. So always just in a much different place in his life. But that connection is what made it's what, it built my business tremendously because he had an iconic store and I wanted to own it. And he wanted to sell it to somebody who he thought had values that aligned with his. And that card, which I hearken back to Victor giving me some of those lessons, is what made it happen. You never know.
12 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, one card. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about cards. I also love writing cards, and I've come across several people, well-known people, and now Gina Schaefer is also in that list, but Dolly Parton, Betty White,
Ah,
and Jesse Itzler are also well known for talking about the power of the handwritten card and some handwritten cards that have radically changed their lives. And I'm sure there's hundreds of cards that they've written that they never
yeah.
heard back on. But I think you bring up a good point, which is you're taking the dirty word out of networking. A lot of us are like, oh, connect with people in my industry. That sounds a lot like that horrible networking thing and
Right.
where it's like with an agenda. But you writing a handwritten card or even writing an email, even if you don't want to write a handwritten card, writing an email, like, I really want to be you when I grow up, period. Right?
Yeah.
No agenda. I'm not asking you for anything, but just some kudos, just a little bit of uplifting. That's something that you never know the day that that person might receive that, how much they needed it and how they might
Needed it.
treasure it for over a decade.
Yeah. It's remarkable to me how few people do it. I think it's really easy to stay in touch with people. But that is not common. And if we make it a practice in our life to do it for everything, not just when we're looking for a new job, it's always easier to find a new job or your next path or your next client or your next friend. I had somebody call me years ago and ask me to go to lunch. And we had this great lunch, and he was a builder in the area. And at the end of lunch, he goes, I really like you. Will you be my friend? And I was like, I thought it was the weirdest thing ever. But I've done that, I don't know, dozens of times since then and he and I are still friends. He was like, yeah, I thought you were really cool. And why couldn't I just say, we didn't have any business together at the time. He's like, why couldn't I just ask you to be my friend? Okay, why not?
Want to be my friend? My little brother used to say that to people on the playground, and we would not laugh at him, but we would always make the joke. Hi, I'm his name is Tom. Hi, I'm Tom. Want to be my friend? But how great is that, right? I say that sometimes. I'll meet somebody that I really like and they're like, "Oh, great. Yeah, we should stay in touch." And I say, "I'm sorry, you're stuck with me. I like
Oh,
you.
yeah.
So we're gonna be hanging out. You ain't getting rid of
You
me."
said that to the wrong person.
Yeah. If you're cool, don't hang out with me because we're gonna be friends. You like I said, you're in this amazing it's really it is a challenging time, but it's also a very fruitful time. And in no way am I saying that you're knocking on death's door, but you're entering a new chapter of your life. And so I'm curious, what do you think you're gonna look back on as and I don't say necessarily from retirement because I wrote a book called You Might Die Tomorrow. I'm all about how the power of mortality allows us to see things with this crystal clarity that it's very challenging to see when we're in the thick of the washing machine of life, as I call it.
Right.
So when you are at the end of your life, let's say you're on your Gina deathbed, the sheets are probably chartreuse, you've got card making supplies and amazing people surrounding you. What are you going to look back on in your career that really filled your heart and soul and made you feel fulfilled?
Honestly, I wonder if I even know what that is yet. I want to live another 50 years. And so maybe that hasn't happened yet. Who knows, right? I guess if it happened tomorrow, I would want to be known for building this amazing brick and mortar business in a really hard retail environment in a city that needed revitalization with team members who people wouldn't hire. And I did. I don't know. I mean, that sounds so
No,
fluffy.
that's it. It
I
doesn't sound
also
fluffy at all.
I also just want to be known for being a good friend. I mean, how could we wish for anything greater than that in some respects?
Yeah. I can tell you looking from the outside that if I were you, I would feel really fulfilled by, like you said, having hired people and given people a chance and changed the course of people's lives who absolutely needed a hand at a
Yeah.
desperate and challenging moment of their life. For standing up for people who a lot of people won't stand up for, women, addicts, and people who
Yep.
have been to prison, ex-convicts. Also for
Yep.
yeah, like I said, like you said, building a brick and mortar business in a, ever online world and like, okay, building a brick and mortar business, that's really cool, but the meaning in that is that brick and mortar is where human connections happen, and you
Happen.
foster
Yeah.
a space of that. So from the outside, I think you've done amazing job and fulfilling job, and your ripples will go and have gone far beyond. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we could like zoom out to another planet and see all the ripples of positivity
Yes.
that Gina Schaefer and
Oh,
me and anybody who's listening that we have created, because we'll never be able to understand. You'll never be able to understand that one person who you hired, who maybe you had to fire after 5 days because you realized they were stealing from the register. You don't know how you giving them a chance, even though they messed it up, might have stuck with them for their entire life.
yeah. Oh, I mean, I've got examples of that exact thing.
Really?
Um, wow, the visual that you just brought, like the idea of creating that visual with even the little tentacles that we could think of, so cool. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, like a
It's
stone
fun.
dropped into water creates ripples. Those
Yeah.
ripples will go on, like I said, far beyond that which we can ever comprehend. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's cooler that we'll never fully understand and and truly they will go on for generations,
Yeah.
right?
And just know
Energy
that it
never
exists.
dies, it continues to go on. And your spirit of openness and curiosity and courage and a desire to help others has absolutely changed the world. And I want to thank you for coming today and
Thank
sharing
you.
your wisdom. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gina. It's been a pleasure. You have inspired me so much about lifting other people up, about finding meaning wherever we are, and by staying open and curious in our everyday life in order to welcome all that the world has to offer us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Alive with Kate Manser with me. Truly, I take it as no small honor. You have so much out there you could be listening to. So the fact that you took this time with me and my show, honestly,
means absolutely the world to me. I hope that you got some meaning, some purpose, a little dash of aliveness, and definitely some inspiration out of what you heard today. That is always, always my goal. If you liked what you heard, please share this episode with a friend, a confidant, with a mentor. Please, more, darling. Always more. Excess. Everything. We want it all in this life. So share it and go on your app of choice and leave some stars, leave a review. It helps me buy food for pajamas, and it helps more people find this show so that we can all live just profoundly alive together. It's a beautiful day, y'all. Thank you for being here.